So now, we're really pleased and excited to welcome to the stage Kathleen Marden, but I want to tell you a little bit about her. You probably already know, but her background is incredible. She's the recipient of MUFON's Researcher of the Year and the International UFO Congress Lifetime Achievement Award. She is one of the leading UFO contact researchers of our time. Since 1990, she has been researching the perplexing nature of UFOs and the non-human entities associated with highly advanced aerial vehicles via her own groundbreaking investigations and experimentations. Her research has extended to the United States government's involvement in the investigation of UFOs and the major studies it has produced. Kathleen's interest in UFOs and contact began in 1961 when her aunt and uncle, Betty and Barney Hill, had a now famous close encounter and subsequent abduction in New Hampshire's White Mountains. She spent 15 years in painstaking investigation of the Hill abduction case and continues to seek the scientific analysis of the compelling evidence. She has worked on 3 comprehensive studies of nearly 5,000 experiencers. She co-authored a best-selling book, Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, with nuclear physicist Stan Friedman, who came to several of our earlier UFO fests. How many people remember Stan? Yeah. Kathleen's book with Denise Stoner, The Alien Abduction Files, includes her investigation of 6 intergenerational cases of abduction and contact. Another of her books, Extraterrestrial Contact, What Do You Do When You've Been Abducted?, is a comprehensive guide for the experiencers. Her latest book, Forbidden Knowledge, A Personal Journey from Alien Abduction to Spiritual Transformation, is a deeper insight into Kathleen's own life and works. And with that, let's give a big round to Kathleen.
Well, it's wonderful to be back this year with all of you. I always look forward to coming to this conference. I just love it and the way it's set up and all of the nice people that I come here from Florida to meet in Oregon. So when Tim invited me to speak, I sent him a list of different presentations I could give, and I said, what do you think the audience will be interested in? And he said, all of it. So what I'm going to present today is snippets of information. I'm not going to be able to get into great detail on all of it, but I think that you're going to like what I present. So just as an overview, I'll be talking about what have the US government's official studies revealed, what is the best evidence, what commonalities do contact experiencers or abductees share that are not common in the general population, 3 types of contact, negative, mixed with healing, and positive, and what messages have the non-humans imparted, and what are the implications for humanity's future. So in the photographs, you see the Trent photo that was taken in 1950, and underneath that is gun camera photo that was taken in 1957 in France. You can see they're nearly identical. And then next to that is a gimbal radar video taken by the US Navy fighter jet nuclear aircraft carrier, the USS Theodore Roosevelt, in 2015. And I just wanted you to see the similarity that in these photographs, that these kinds of things have been seen in the sky for a very long time. And if you think that these craft might be the invention of some other country on this planet, no one had this technology back in the late 1940s, in 1950. The government started studies on all of this back in the mid-1940s. Something that Stanton always spoke about is the largest study ever done on UFOs by the federal government, funded by the Air Force. It was conducted at the prestigious Battelle Memorial Institute on 3,201 cases. There had been earlier studies where they categorized the sightings by different, just prosaic categories, such as balloons, astronomical, aircraft, miscellaneous, psychological, insufficient information. And they also did a chi-square analysis. The unknowns that could not be categorized as anything common were 21.5%. In the earlier study, it was nearly 27%, but there were a little less than 1,600 cases that they worked on. So this is important because in the chi-square analysis, the better the observer, the more qualified the observer, the longer the observation, the more likely it was to be a true unknown. And the chance that an unknown was simply a missed known was less than 1%. So this is why this study is so very important. Recently, the Defense Intelligence Agency has released information that has been declassified, and some of the flight capabilities are that they have flight capabilities vastly beyond our second-generation technology, instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocity, low observability, anti-gravity capabilities, transmedium travel in our atmosphere and under our bodies of water. And I would like to add in space as well. So there has been a recently declassified report, 1,574 pages. Now, a lot of people don't want to present this because it's a little bit embarrassing to serious researchers, because it was a tabloid, The Sun, in England that received this information through a Freedom of Information Act request. But there is good information there, and a lot of it, or some of it, is on the physiological effects of getting too close to a craft can have on a human, or being on a craft as well. So John Schuessler at one time was MUFON's executive director, and he worked for NASA. He was an engineer, and he's still alive. I'm going to show you his picture. Here he is when I was younger and I was at a conference with my Aunt Betty Hill. And so John wrote a wonderful catalog of physical effects on human beings. And he was the major investigator on the Piney Woods investigation of Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum and Vicki's grandson. And Betty Cash was burned by this diamond-shaped craft that was hovering overhead. It was spewing out like flames, like fire, almost like molten metal. And she stood too close, looking at it too long. She ended up in the hospital for a month. She could never work again. She was so terribly disabled by the ionizing radiation that she was subjected to. And so that is part of it. But John has cataloged case after case after case of physical effects on human bodies. Also, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program has released 42 of 300 unpublished cases. And here is their study, anomalous acute and subacute field effects on human biological tissues. So I think that we have to get over the idea that the information was released to a tabloid and look at the studies themselves. Some of the rare consequences of getting too close to or taken to a UAP are warping space-time, and this is all from the reports, electromagnetic heating and radiation burns, damage to the nervous system and cognitive damage, hair loss, nausea, unaccounted for pregnancies or lost pregnancies, telepathy, poltergeist activity, orbs, shadow entities, and other high strangeness events in the home. If you've read the new book that I highly recommend, it's called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. It's full of information that has been released by the Department of Defense. And excellent book. Talks about what happened to scientists who went to the Skinwalker Ranch to do research and investigation, and how they picked up hitchhikers is what they call them, and they went home with them. Also, Marian apparitions was mentioned. So people seeing Jesus' mother, Mary. So, and sometimes receiving prophecy. So getting into the best evidence case of a UFO abduction is Betty and Barney Hill. It was the first. There was nothing that you could, that they would know in advance. And what you see is Betty and Barney up at the top. There are Stanton and myself at the American Philosophical Society. We went there several times, and very interesting files. We were particularly interested in the correspondence files of the, what he called debunkers and what I call disinformants, because debunkers take the bunk out, they put the bunk in. So I call them disinformants. And there were many files there about their plans, and Philip Klass, Donald Menzel, Carl Sagan had files there, many others. And Dr. Donald Menzel from Harvard, Stanton always talked about him. He was an astrophysicist, very closely connected to the government. And in fact, he was listed as one of the participants in MJ-12. And no one could figure out how would someone who was on MJ-12, Majestic 12, be a debunker. But if you look at his background, you'll find out that he was lobbying. He worked for the NSA, very closely connected to the CIA, and he was lobbying the Air Force way back in the early 50s to debunk all of this. He had used just some simple meteorological tests that he did in a laboratory, and he thought that he could use those to just debunk all UFOs. The Air Force didn't go along with his request, and he was furious about that. But in 1953, he wrote his first anti-UFO book. So what you see here is captured, Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. Stanton and I wrote the first one together, and then I recently updated it for the 60th anniversary with new evidence. And I'm going to be showing you just a couple of pieces of that evidence. I'm not going to be focusing a lot on it, but just briefly, because this is the best evidence. There was no previous basis for the details remembered. There was conscious recall of a silent, hovering craft, 200 feet above the car, and then 100 feet above Barney as he stood in a field looking up at it. Barney was a skeptic. He did not believe it was possible, and he kept attempting to identify it as being something conventional, which he simply couldn't do. He had conscious recall of observing non-humans on that craft. It's in the early reports. They made a report to Pease Air Force Base on the day after they arrived home. They heard that evening, on the 20th, when they arrived home, September 1961, from my father's best friend, who was just stopped by for coffee. And Betty had been on the phone with my mother talking about what had happened to them. And so my father's friend was the chief of police in Newton, New Hampshire, and said, well, Pease Air Force Base is advising us to tell people who have seen UFOs to report them to Pease. So that's why they did the following day. They also made a report to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena on September 26th, after Betty had read the address in the first book that she ever read on UFOs. The disinformants will tell you she had a lifelong interest in science fiction and UFOs, but it's bunk. I'm debunking them. 2 radar reports from that night, it's all in the book. 12 to 14 witnesses to the craft, which is very important. Betty's dress, Barney's shoes, their watches were destroyed. Magnetic field around the car trunk. Witness trauma, especially in Barney. He became so traumatized that he was hospitalized with bleeding ulcers. And this is what led him to neuropsychiatrist Dr. Benjamin Simon through a referral, because he was not responding to traditional medical treatment. And he had a life-threatening illness due to these pent-up emotions. So they had separate hypnosis sessions with Dr. Simon. Barney was the patient. Betty went with him and asked to be hypnotized too. Dr. Simon said, I will do it, but I will not do it together. Each of you will be taken separately, and I am going to reinstate amnesia at the end of each session. He did that for 2 reasons. One, so that they couldn't share information and contaminate one another's information. The other was because at times, each of them became so traumatized, so hysterical during the sessions that he did not want to inflict further damage to them by letting them remember all of this at once. There was a many scientific analyses and verification of evidence, the lie detector test that Betty took, and there was absolutely no evidence of deception. She passed it with flying colors. Witnesses, both Betty and Barney, were of excellent character, and they did not want to go public with this information. Barney had been nominated to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission in 1965 when they were still holding the story to themselves, and they were willing to talk to scientists, to the military, to the family and friends, but we were all sworn to secrecy. But the story did get out to a reporter, and he did his own investigation and published it. I'm also going to talk about an alien symbol study right now. This is symbols that Betty sketched for me during my investigation of their case. I started my investigation in about 1990 and worked on it for many, many years. So I had these symbols, and Dr. Don C. Don Derry, I found out later, much later, had done a couple of symbol studies. And this involved not only him, he was a psychology professor at McGill University who spent his lifetime working on social research. And he did some on experiencers. There was also Dr. Stuart Appel from the State University of New York at Brockport, who worked on the symbol studies, and also samples taken from experiencers that Bud Hopkins had hypnotized, and they had sketched these symbols under hypnosis. And this is the statement from Dr. Don Derry. The symbols Betty remembered and that were published for the first time in 2007 look remarkably like many of the symbols that Hopkins has been collecting from abductees since 1975. So that counts as evidence. More evidence was in the star map, and it has been updated recently. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. You're probably familiar with all of this. But this is Marjorie Fish, and she was the individual amateur astronomer, member of Mensa, who had worked for years building three-dimensional models to attempt to identify the stars on Betty's map, and that she had sketched as a result of a post-hypnotic suggestion by Benjamin Simon. She had been shown this when she was on the craft, when she asked where they came from. So Stanton was then called in. It took Marjorie several years. She didn't find a match until our technology developed, and we were able to get better distance data, better information on the stars. And then she was able to find a match. So the important thing about that match is that all the pattern stars are sun-like. All of the pattern stars you see there are sun-like, although only 5% of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood, out 54 light years, are sun-like. And all of the sun-like stars in this volume of space on Betty's map are there. And the pattern makes sense, nearest star to nearest star. So it's in a plane, Stanton used to say, like pepperoni on a pizza, rather than like raisins spread out in a thick loaf of raisin bread. And one of the astronomers who worked on this map, there were others, but one of them wrote that if we lived on Zeta Reticuli and we were exploring our local galactic neighborhood, those are the stars that we would go to. And there's been an update on this by an astrophysicist. And she discovered that the Fish model is still 89% accurate. She actually had 2,289 models. Marjorie Fish did 14. And there might be two stars that are better choices for a match. And she said that a clear pattern of exploration emerged based on what we know about exoplanets and the ability to remotely detect potential life-bearing worlds. And that seemed anything but random. Furthermore, she wrote, it was based on information that was not known to anyone on Earth in 1961. So I think that, or until fairly recently, I think that that's very important. Also, you've, I'm sure, heard about Betty's dress, the damage to Betty's dress. You can see photographs of the dress here. What was interesting to me is that fairly recently, Ben Hansen and I were in New Hampshire at the library where I set up the archival collection for Betty and Barney. And Ben used to work for the FBI. And he is excellent at what he does. We turned the dress inside out. We looked at the exterior of the dress. And then we found some spots on the dress that looked like blood to him, that were like near the location of Betty's navel. And he said, isn't that interesting? Maybe we should take a sample of that. So I cut a sample out for the camera, and then I took that sample home with me, and I was looking for a scientist who could do a laboratory test on that. I ended up finding MUFON's biological laboratory scientist. She did a DNA test. I had a filter with Betty's blood on it. And the problem we encountered, or that the lab analyst encountered, was that the blood was so old that she could no longer identify it as blood. She knew only it was fluid from Betty's body. It matched Betty's DNA. And then she sampled this stain on Betty's dress, which did not go through to the outside of the dress. So we knew it didn't come from outside, it came from inside. And it was a match. This is what she wrote. It must be concluded that this stain came from body fluids of the wearer of the dress. So this might possibly be confirmation that Betty actually did have a needle inserted into her navel. So Dr. Don Donderi, who I spoke about a few moments ago, has worked with me on a study for the Mutual UFO Network. I was the director of the experiencer research team for a period of 10 years. And Dr. Donderi was interested in this study that I was proposing, and so he worked on it with me. He had standardized what they called the American Personality Inventory. It was written by a psychiatric social worker with assistance from Bud Hopkins. They started out with 600 questions for the abductees that they worked with, and they were trying to identify people who had UFO abduction syndrome, which meant that they had the psychological characteristics, some trauma, but they also had information that wasn't widely known. And Dr. Donderi then took it, he standardized it, he worked with 3 different groups. One group were abductees. Another one were simulators or wannabes. These were people who knew a lot about UFO abduction, but they weren't abductees. They didn't have the other characteristics. And then the third category were just the controls, members of the general public who didn't have a lot of information or the psychology of abductees. So we used that as part of phase 2 of our study. Phase 1 had 115 participants. We narrowed it down to 175 for phase 2. And what we did was we attempted to identify those commonalities that experiencers share. We had trick questions in there as well. And then we were looking for abductees, those with UFO abduction syndrome. I don't really like the word abduction, but I have to use it because that's what it's called in these cases. And so we compared the statistics. So I'm going to just share with you a little bit of those commonalities now. So how old were you when you were taken? Among the survey takers overall, 72% said that they were under age 20 the first time they were taken. Among the abductee group, it was 80%. So most people state that they were taken for the first time when they were children. We asked, do you have conscious recall of observing a UFO at less than 500 feet in the distance? 65% for the survey takers, 70% for the abductee group. Were there witnesses with you? Survey takers, 46%. Abductees, 50%. Have family members observed a UFO up close? 50% for the survey takers, 60% for the abductees. Have family members been abducted or contacted? For the survey takers, only 41%, but for the abductee group, 60% knew of other family members who had also been taken. That is intergenerational. We asked, have you awakened to find yourself unable to move or cry out? Symptoms of sleep paralysis. So many of the skeptics have said that this is all sleep paralysis. It's not really happening to anyone, and they claim there's no evidence for it. Well, 75% of the survey takers said yes, and 90% of the abductees. They had those symptoms. But then we asked, have you been awake but saw a non-human in your environment and then became unable to move or cry out? Only 36% of the survey takers remembered this occurring, but 60% of the abductee group had this occur. We asked, what was the demeanor of the entities you encountered? 48% said businesslike. Most were businesslike. 37% said they were kind to me. 11% said they were evil. And 30% said varied by entity type. So they could select more than one answer to this question. We asked if they could end their experiences today, would they? And only 29% said yes of the experiences overall. 71% said no, I don't want this to end. Among the abductee group, it was 75% who wanted it to continue. So now I'm going to move on to the immediate response that someone has when they've had this experience. Most people, even if they were taken as children, don't have a lot of memory of this. But when they finally do remember, they experience anxiety and sometimes trauma, terror in the night. They're afraid to get up in the middle of the night, even to use the bathroom. They walk with trepidation. Some people feel really anger and resentment toward all of this. They feel ill or unwell whenever they have an experience. There's ridicule or isolation, that fear if they tell anyone. So many people are holding it inside, feeling they can't tell anyone. And that's one of the reasons that we formed MUFON's Experiencer Research Team initially. It's now Experiencer Resource Team, to help these people who don't want someone to pass judgment on them, but simply to give them the opportunity to talk to a non-judgmental listener. And maybe refer them to a support group if they want that. Refer them to a professional if they want hypnosis or they're looking for a clinical psychologist. They know that they are not like others, and they view the world differently than they did previously. Later, when people learn their purpose, and we talk to so many people who are in their 50s, their 60s, 70s, even 80s, who have contact periodically. They're being healed now. They're receiving information. This is why they don't want it to end. So our studies indicate that they begin to love their ET friends. Some people wonder if it's Stockholm Syndrome. They become more spiritually oriented. They become psychic. They become an empath, where they can feel another person's emotions as if they are their own, or they can feel particular pain in an individual's body, in their own body. Some of these people have become healers. As I said, the ETs are healing people. And you become more concerned about the welfare of your planet. You want contact to continue, receive messages from the ETs. You long to be with them. So many experiencers that I've worked with have not wanted to come back. They wanted to stay there with their ET families, and you become less concerned about material possessions. Well, there is a small percentage. I told you about 11% in our study. It was 9% in the Edgar Mitchell Foundation study. I was also worked on that study. With these evil ones who may not even be extraterrestrials, I don't have enough evidence, but I do have evidence that they attach to people. They feed off fear and loathing. So individuals who become extraordinarily angry and they fight back at this are just feeding these negative entities and causing them to grow and cause more difficulty in their lives. They can materialize in your house in front of you. They're shapeshifters. They might be draconian reptilians at one moment, or beautiful, blonde, human-looking individuals the next moment. And so often you hear about rape. Well, it's a beautiful, human-looking individual, but then when the person is being raped, that turns into a draconian reptilian. They'll make you ill. There's no goodness whatsoever in their presence, and they're just horrible beings, my opinion. I'm going to talk about 3 cases, very interesting cases that I worked on. There was a lot of evidence in each of those cases. I'm going to only be able to show you a little bit. The first is negative contact, this kind that I just talked about. In Texas, I worked with the experiencer from 2010 to 2016. The next one is ET healing from a man who had cancer in Manitoba. I started working on his case in 2012 and until 2019. And then another case of positive contact, even though one of the experiencers was highly traumatized after the event, because she knew what the media was saying happened, and she thought all sorts of horrible things had happened to her, which had not. This was in North Carolina. So in the first case, this is in East Texas, Melvin, was a commercial pilot, and then he retired, and he was leasing this airport, this private airport, and he was working on planes. He had a couple of men who worked with him. He and his wife were living on the property, and they intended to build a house adjacent to the property on land that they had purchased. So he had never seen a UFO, didn't believe they were real, but then one night he was up in his apartment with his wife, and he heard people outside. And so he went out to see what was going on. He was always afraid that teenagers were going to be out there drinking or vandalizing the property. He went out, and they weren't teenagers, they were adults, and they were pointing up into the sky. And he told me it was the brightest, most intense light he had ever seen. And he automatically became so interested in this that he thought he would do an experiment to try to call them in so that he could sit down at a table with these ETs and have a discussion, and they would tell him everything they were doing. So obviously, he knew absolutely nothing about what he was getting himself into. This is the runway. This is the airport. It's 2 miles away from any houses or human activity. It's surrounded by forest land. It abuts a Native American reservation. The land that the airport is on was donated to the white man by the Native Americans. And what happened here is very much like what happened on the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. To give you a little bit, this is one of his photographs. of a craft. You can see the small in the sky, and then I just enlarged it. One night, he woke up in the middle of the night, and he decided to call his sister, who was working overseas. And they had a discussion, and he hung up the phone, and then he decided to go to the door and look out into the hangar. And what he saw was this bark brown entity that was standing up against the wall. And then these three little 3.5 foot tall entities. And he said that the skin was so white, it almost glowed. And he said when they moved, it reminded him of a gate, that the three of them moved just like this in unison. And they were wearing little silver suits, and he called them roper boots, little silver roper boots. And he turned around and went to his bedroom as quickly as possible, not knowing that they could move through walls, and they started taking him. It became so bad that his wife left him. He became very angry. He started fighting back. He was carrying a gun everywhere he went. He slept with a gun. In fact, one time he woke up and he saw one standing in his bedroom, and he pulled up his gun and he shot it, and it disappeared in a burst of blue light. This was not a good experience for him at all. So these are some of the mistakes that he made. He became so frightened of all of this that he ended up boarding up the windows in a bedroom and handcuffing himself to the wall. One time he found himself 2 miles away from where he lived without shoes, this is in the middle of the night, and dressed only in his undershorts. So this was not good for him. He believed that this was demonic. He was Catholic. His best friend had worked on the highway patrol in Texas. I spoke to him too, and he testified about some of the things that he had actually observed and how he was trying to help Mel. He convinced Mel to become a fundamentalist Christian and thought that this was going to be more powerful than Catholicism in order to get rid of these entities. But the mistake that Mel made is that he used anger. He was just feeding these entities. What he needed to do was to raise his frequency, to become a happier person, to project love. He needed to be able to teach himself to overcome those emotions and project love in their direction. And when you do that, you're not feeding these negative entities what they want, and they might go away. He ended up actually leaving. He lost everything just to get away from this, moved in with his mother and stepfather. One time his family had an intervention with him, and he said to them, just spend time with me, stay overnight here, sleep here, and you'll see yourself. So his mother did, and he and his mother at night looked out toward the runway, and they didn't see the runway lights, they didn't see the markers, nothing. What they saw was a daylight and a grassy savanna, and what he believed were mammoths feeding on the grass. Now, these time shifts are common at the Skinwalker Ranch too, and I'm aware of 3 other places in the United States where this kind of activity is taking place. One day, the hangar floor shook. It produced a 60-foot crack in the floor, and then this, like lava, started to ooze up out of the floor. Very strange. This is testimony from family members. From his mother, she said, I do want to confirm that unusual and horrific things occurred at the hangar. I am saddened and at the same time chilled to the bone by what I believe was going on there. I saw and experienced a few things while I was there, and to be truthful, I was terrified to visit after 2011. And his aunt said to me, the worst thing he ever did was to move to the hangar at Woodville. I'm convinced the property is far more than what we see or experience on the surface. I think that there is an underground facility, tunnel, or something of that kind in that area. This is the second case where the healing took place. I began investigating this when Jim had a close encounter in 2012, and then he contacted me, and he said, I think I was abducted. And so he told me about how he felt ill, he was shaky, he was perspiring, and so I asked him to take the clothing that he was wearing and put it into a paper bag and put it into a closet for a couple of weeks and then take it out to see what it looked like. I was looking for evidence that was like my Aunt Betty's, that pink powder. He didn't leave it there long enough, but his shirt did turn pink. It had been beige colored, but it was not the same substance that was on Betty's dress. I sent it to Phyllis Budinger, who used to be the Mutual UFO Network's chemist. And so you can see some of the evidence from Jim, this cut on the top of his head. He woke up with that. It was large enough so that blood should have been running down onto his pillow. I've worked on 2 other cases with identical cuts in the top of the head. This very strange mark that looks like tooth marks to me with a needle mark in the center. Also, Jim had found what he believed was an implant after one of his experiences. He had it surgically removed, sent it to MUFON. You can see the test tube there. I'm not sure if that is the little sphere glinting at the bottom or if it's just from a flash from a camera. But there was a little tiny sphere preserved by the surgeon in blood, packed in dry ice, and sent to MUFON headquarters and then on to Phyllis Budinger, who was doing that analysis. By the time it arrived and she dumped it out onto a plate, there was no sphere there. It had dissolved, and that has happened in other cases that we've had. So one day, Jim called me and he was very upset. He'd been diagnosed with lymphoma, and he was afraid that he was going to die. And I said to him, well, Jim, you know, I've worked with several people who have been healed, and all you have to do is ask for healing. And I said, I'll ask for it as well. And I said, well, do you believe in God? And he said, yes. So I said, well, you could cover all bases. Ask the ETs and ask God for healing. So he was doing that. And then these nodes on his neck were growing larger and larger. You can see in the top photograph how enlarged it was. He was scheduled to go in for surgery. A medical doctor that I work with has all of his medical records. And I'm hoping that this is going to play. This is what happened. He was actually able to catch it on camera. You're going to see an orb slide down the wall between the closet doors. It'll be coming very soon. Here it's beginning. Now, I wondered initially, was this just a pointer, laser light? you'll see that it is not. It takes form. And to me, it flies like a butterfly across the room. I have set music to this and slowed it down so that you could see it. It happened very quickly. You can see it puts down tendrils and then it dives down into Jim's body. Jim slept for 12 hours after that happened, and when he woke up, the nodes were no longer visible. When he went in for surgery, 4 tiny necrotic nodes were removed, and they were no longer cancerous. That is the first case that we know of where an orb has been caught on camera that healed an experiencer from cancer. Here are some stills taken from the video slides. And one of our questions on MUFON study was, have you ever observed orbs inside your home with your naked eye? I don't put a lot of credence in people who take pictures of orbs that they cannot see, because it could just be dust orbs. But actually see these orbs that seem to have intelligence and are inside the home. 61% of the experiencers said yes, they had. It was 50% for the abductee group. And then Jim was able to capture this entity that looked like maybe a 3.5 foot tall gray standing in the doorway. You can see that large eye. But then I put it through my photo program. And this is what I ended up with. You can see it, that I enlarged it, I color enhanced it, and I sharpened it, but I did not change what was there in any way. I didn't do any artwork on it. So this is what it looked like, and for the strangest reason, it looks like a gnome of some kind to me. It looks like a fairy. Look at the hat on its head. The eye, you can see the white in the eye, and the iris, and the nose, and the mouth, and what looks like either a very large cleft chin or a beard, maybe, a small arm and a hand. I just found this incredibly interesting because Jim was always telling me he'd go in and lie down to take a nap in the afternoon, and something unseen was jumping on his bed, or it felt like it was walking on his bed. And I can just picture this little guy doing that, having a great time. The third case that I'm going to present to you today is, it took place in North Carolina. Now, Stanton Friedman, who I worked closely with for nearly 14 years, was speaking at a conference, and Pam and Ashley were also speaking at this conference. And Stanton was very impressed with these well-educated women. Pam has a master's degree in archaeology, I believe it is. She had a bachelor's degree, a dual bachelor's degree in theology and archaeology. And finally, I met those women. I was convinced that they were someone that I was willing to work with. They just wanted to meet with somebody who was a confirmed experiencer. And Chris Bledsoe in North Carolina is a confirmed experiencer. I've investigated his case. Dr. Colonel John Alexander has said it's absolutely real. Jim Summervin, retired from the CIA, has investigated the case, said, yes, it's real. Grant Cameron, so many people have been there and seen things. So Chris was gracious enough to say, yes, I'll let them come to my home to set up their equipment and do their study. So This is Pam's history. Now, she was interested in paranormal investigations. They had spirit hunters of the self, highly respected. At age 10, her parents found her unconscious in her yard and had difficulty waking her up. She had recurring dreams of running and hiding from a light that was attempting to capture her. At age 10 or 11, there was a silver disc seen hovering over nearby trees, and it shot over her childhood home. And at age 33, there was a large silent triangle hovering over her home, and there were 2 witnesses to that triangle. So what she and Ashley thought were ghosts in their childhood homes were actually these non-humans, these ETs. So this was the property that Chris was living on at the time. And you might have heard about the smoking tree. There was a tree on the property. You can see that I have a star on that tree. And Chris would put the clothing or photographs of people who were very ill in that tree and ask for healing. And they were receiving healing. So Pam and Ashley went there. They spent the afternoon interviewing Chris and his wife and family. And then they later on went out. They set their camera up 15 feet from the tree. This was a video camera, Bell and Howell. And they were seated in chairs on the other side of what you can see looks like a hedge, where the second star is. So this is the equipment they had. The 35mm camera, radio frequency spirit box with AM and FM frequencies, digital recorder, and the Bell and Howell video camera with infrared, and the tripod. What happened is they went out at 10 o'clock at night, and they waited about 45 minutes looking into the sky. Chris is trying to call in craft, and then a light appears next to the moon. And Chris says, well, I think it could be them. And so they're watching it, and Pam is beginning to ask questions, hoping that she will receive electronic voice phenomena on her spirit box. And then the next thing they know, they're no longer seated. They're standing up. They're holding on to one another. They're reeling back and forth. The equipment they were holding in their hands is gone, and they don't know what has happened. They finally find the equipment underneath the bushes on that hedge. They pick up the video camera. They go into Chris's house, and his wife is there saying, "Where have you been?" And Chris said, "Well, we were just out there in the backyard." And she said, "No, you were not. I was out there looking for you. You were not there." She said, "Do you know what time it is?" And they thought, oh, maybe 11 o'clock. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. So they had this missing time. The women had some memories. Pam remembered what appeared to be human types dressed in blue. Ashley remembered a different type of entity, maybe mantis types, dressed in different uniforms. And Pam and Ashley, even though they were a stepmother and stepdaughter at that point, had a falling out. They didn't speak to one another for more than, well, several years actually, until I had hypnotized both of them separately, a year apart, and worked it out. And I said, don't you know that more than one type of entity can work together on the same craft? And then they decided that they could talk to one another again, which I'm happy they worked that part out of it. Well, they started to analyze the video from the video camera, and they had only a few seconds of what appeared to be non-human entities coming in and dropping off kind of an indigo-colored beam. very interesting. So I asked them for the video footage, and I did a frame-by-frame analysis. And what I'm going to show you next is the video, which is very unimpressive. You're going to be looking down toward the bottom of the screen. You're just going to see darkness. You're going to see a beam that shoots across that had not been there initially. And then you're going to see an entity moving back and forth across the screen. And then at the end, you're going to see a bright light, and it's going to show an entity up fairly close. Don't be disappointed. I want to show you the video, but then I'm going to show you the still images that I captured from these frames. So you'll see what they look like. Okay, so I've been through this, and let's play the video. See it coming up, rising up. You can see those blue, shiny things that Ashley actually observed. So, not much, very unimpressive. Let's go to the still frames. So this was the large one that you saw at the end of the video. Notice the colors in the trees. I did not do anything to alter those colors in the trees. They were those turquoise blue and green colors. And I at first thought, is this a mantis type? Because I thought that that part that I'm showing in yellow, and then I show the enlargement in a different color. But I thought, maybe that's a mantis type. But then I noticed the body. Do you see the black clothing that it's wearing? It seems to have like pleats in its sleeves, on its arms, and it seems to be wearing some kind of headgear. We were not able to get a good look at its face. In one of the photographs that I was able to take, it has what appears to be a chiseled nose sticking out. And under hypnosis, when Pam described the entities that took her to craft, she talked about how they looked like humans with dark blonde, light brown hair. There were 2 men, 2 women dressed in blue. They were wearing chevrons. And the men had chiseled noses and prominent cheekbones and eyes larger than humans. Here's another. This little entity was sitting on the ground. He was the one that you saw flying across the screen. So what you see is in slide 1 is the top of his head. He's sitting kind of cross-legged. He has his his hands down on the ground, and he appears to have something on his back. And then suddenly, he's bathed in blue, and he lifts up into the air. And he's holding this blue light in one hand, and he's just rotating back and forth, looking for the humans that he wants to capture in that blue light. And here he is when he's closer to the camera, and you can see that blue light that he's holding. He has a very odd-shaped head. Up close, I was able to see, as I was examining those frames, what appears to be a metal bar on his forehead. And it comes up, and it juts back. So maybe that's some kind of antenna. And his legs are folded at the knees, and they're attached to what appears to be some kind of a chair that I can see in different images from the slides, or from the video, the slides from the video. And look at what might be a neck. Very strange. I'm not positive if that long curved neck belongs to him, or not, but it would give him the opportunity to use it to look around. Now, I've shown this to a couple of psychics who can see auras, and they tell me that he does not have an aura, so they don't think that he is a sentient being. They think that he could be sort of robotic, something that was created to do this job. And here's another one. Now, Ashley, after this, and in her hypnosis and back at her home, has had these mantis-type entities coming to her house. And so we thought that perhaps this entity up in this tree with a triangular face was a mantis entity. And you can see what looked like kind of lobster claw or mitten-type hands on this one, which is characteristic of these entities. And I believe they have exoskeletons. They're extraordinarily thin and skeletal in their appearance. A lot of times, in fact, they disguise themselves. So this is what they were able to capture, and I am thrilled to have this because so many experiencers have sent me video or still shots of non-humans, but the quality is so poor that I can't use it, I can't show it. This quality was good compared to everything else that I've received. They're not posing for the camera. When they realized that they were on camera, they moved off frame very, very rapidly. Here are some messages that the ETs gave Ashley, and Ashley talked about. She said it's about raising the vibration of everything. Earth is not the only planet that has these issues. We must increase the vibration because it is the only way that anyone will become aware and understand and become their better selves to ensure the survival of the planet and the creatures on it. It's not just the humans that have to increase their vibration. It's every living creature. Fear is the enemy of animals and of humans. It is counteractive to raising the vibration. So some of you are probably wondering, what do you mean by raising the vibration? And the way the ETs tend to describe it is that you just become more spiritual. You raise to a point where you are a more loving human. You have respect and caring for other humans and animals as well. And messages that Pam received from the human-type entity. They lived on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago, but had to move on to a nearby star system. They are now probing nearby nebula and assessing Earth. They take material goods from other places, but not from Earth. They have an interest in the human species. She has been visited and taken by this group since she was a little girl, and Earth is now a temporary stopover on the way to elsewhere. In fact, I have so much information from these women, it would be an entire hour-and-a-half presentation. But this is what I can share with you in the time frame that I have. My Aunt Betty always talked about Admiral Herbert Knowles. He was actually a rear admiral in the Navy, and he lived in Maine, just over the river from Portsmouth, where Betty lived. And she and Barney were invited to his house for brunch, and this is after Admiral Knowles became aware that they had this contact event. And they were hesitant to go because they were afraid that they were going to be ridiculed. But Betty and Barney went anyway, and there were people there. There were people from the military, from the Navy, in the United States, and officers from Canada as well. And Wilbert Smith's widow, Merle, was there as well. And Betty and Barney had a wonderful time. They saw metal that had been recovered from a crashed UFO in Canada. And so for years, I wanted more information. When I wrote Captured, I wrote about the information that I had. During my investigation, I was looking for more information from the family. I wasn't able to find it when I had written the first version of Captured. But finally, I put that word out widely enough that I was speaking at a conference in New Hampshire, and Admiral Knowles, we called him not Rear Admiral, we called him Admiral Knowles, granddaughter, came and handed me a thick packet of information. And it contained letters between Admiral Knowles and Wilbert Smith. And Wilbert Smith was a radio engineer for the Canadian government. He was a brilliant man with many patents. And he was the UFO guy for the Canadian government as well. So I found the correspondence files incredibly interesting. And I'm going to share the messages in those correspondence files because Admiral Knowles had a woman from the town he lived in go to his home and give him a thick packet of information. She said that she was communicating with extraterrestrials. Her name was Frances Swan, and I've written in my new book, Forbidden Knowledge, about this more extensively. So Admiral Knowles sat down and he wrote a letter to Dwight Eisenhower. And I also have letters from Helen Knowles, who was his wife and was friendly with my Aunt Betty after they had met at their home. And so the letter said, Mrs. Swan exhibited the ability to answer scientific questions well beyond her education, and the answers were given to her by an alien named Alpha. The U.S. Navy and the Canadian government are investigating. The FBI, U.S. Air Force, and CIA joined in the investigation. So this information went to Dwight Eisenhower's desk, and it began a secret investigation. Here you can see the book that I've most recently published, and these are FBI files pertaining to Mrs. Swan and Admiral Knowles and Wilbert Smith. There were other people from the Navy who were involved in learning to communicate with these non-human entities that Frances Swan believed she was communicating with. And Admiral Knowles and Wilbert Smith were attempting to scientifically prove or disprove that this information was accurate. So this is what Admiral Knowles wrote to Wilbert Smith. He said, out of all of this, I believe the following basic facts have been established. Flying saucers are real and come from outer space. The real important thing to know about them is why they are here. Their source and mechanics are merely incidental. This is happening in 1954. Their people have contacted people all over the earth in various ways, trying to get to us a common message about coming events. No one nation, people, or area is being shown preference by them, and none will be. Any technical knowledge gained from them will be so incomplete that no nation can take advantage of it to the detriment of any other nation. So they were willing to share technology, but they were going to make us work together. And you know, no one wanted to do that. And absolute neutrality is requisite in all their contacts with us. Beware of all reports that show preference or partiality on their part. They said, you must stop polluting the earth. They're still saying it. Humans must become more spiritual and raise their vibrational frequency. We will provide competent teachers to educate all of you. There is a displaced magnetic field problem on Earth caused by nuclear explosions. We're working to repair this, and they did get scientific evidence that they were being repaired, particularly around Japan. And all vibration is sound. Sound waves permeate the universe and affect the human body. Become peaceful, and your sound will create peace. And this is briefly one of the answers from a study that I participated in. It was a scientific study with a man who was an experiencer, had been for most of his life, had his first experience when he was 9 years old. And living in the UK, he grew up, he became a police officer, he married his wife, worked at the university. She was doing social research and teaching at the university. So they happened to move to Florida more than 20 years ago, became US citizens. He now sells real estate. And we met him at a conference in Orlando where I was speaking for MUFON in 2015, I believe it was. And we somehow ended up working with him, and still do, but for 2 years, we met 1 weekend a month, and we were able to ask questions, 2 or 3 questions. At first, he would become extraordinarily hot when this was happening and very, very tired. As time went on, we were able to individually meet these non-human entities. We could measure their presence with a laser thermometer, an increase in temperature. With the 9th dimensionals, it was much more than with the 5th and 6th dimensionals. We felt very strong energy coming from their bodies. We couldn't see their bodies because they're in the 5th and 6th dimensions, and as I said, one in the 9th dimension. But we could certainly feel their presence, and we learned to communicate telepathically with some of them. So in one of the questions, we asked, why don't you land on the White House lawn? And the answer we received is, we've made our presence known to your governments. They know we are here. We have shown them that we are here. We have shown your military that we are here. They don't accept it, and they fear us. We've shut down your missiles. We've disabled your missiles when you fired them. We flew a fleet of our craft from the north down through Russia, down through the Balkans, down through your Europe, and we turned around and we went back up again. We were seen on your radar. The Americans thought it was the Russians thought it was the Americans, and then they realized that it was us. But they still refuse to acknowledge the fact that we are here. All your leaders know that we are here. They just don't want to admit it to the population. So we have to try another method. If we land on your White House lawn or at the Kremlin, it will be seen as an invasion, and we do not want that. In my new book, there are 120 of our questions and their answers. So here are my renditions of some of them. And another message, I asked, what is the difference between interdimensionals on this planet and you being interdimensionals? Are you actually from space, or are you just from another dimension on our planet? And this is what they said. There are interdimensional beings that just live in the spiritual. These do transcend the dimensions from time to time. Then they have what you call extraterrestrials from different dimensions. The difference between the dimensions is only difference in the vibrational frequencies that they exist in. So people get mistaken between the spiritual and the physical from the different dimensions. So they say, we live in the fifth, we live in the sixth dimension. On planets, our lifestyle is very much like on your planet, but we're just of a higher frequency. So you are not able to see us. But, and so they say, as we raise our vibration, we will be able to see them and we'll become better at communicating with them as well. Also, I talked at the beginning about the MUFON survey that the Experiencer research team did over a 3-year period. And these are some of the responses to the open-ended questions. And I just didn't select them according to any agenda that I might have. This information was restated over and over again by people who participated. So one reason people frequently find contact with non-human intelligence so traumatizing is that human minds are incredibly defended against contact from or communication with non-human, greater intelligence than their own. Humans have historically used their own intelligence to subjugate and oppress sentient beings that we deem to be of lesser intellect than ourselves. This was arguably a necessary step in evolution. Still, it remains mostly unprocessed. As a result of this latent supremacism of the human mind is deeply buried and is associated with strong existential fears about what it means to be dehumanized or treated as alien. More comments. We must unite in love and raise our vibration as a collective. The higher dimensions are here assisting us. If we raise our consciousness to a higher level, we can achieve more. This is what they are trying to do here. We have been to this position before, and we destroyed ourselves. They are fearful that we might do it again. We're shoving ourselves closer to extinction. He said, I hate the Greys with every fiber of my being, but they have given me information I wish I did not have. There are many cautionary remarks issued regarding our stewardship of planet Earth, and I was told that we must preserve resources, and if we don't, we will experience a decrease in human population. That was not me, that was another. That was a participant in the study. And at the core of our souls, we are connected to everything and everyone. This is why ETs are here. We are children holding the Creator's gun, and we need guidance. So this is my latest book. I talk about my personal struggle with the unknown that has carried me through the twists and turns and glimpses of mysterious realities, and the coveted work that I have done as well, investigations and experimentation. All my books are for sale over at this vendor table. I'll be down here at the MUFON table, so if you would like me to personalize a book to you, I'll be happy to do that. This is the 60th anniversary edition of Captured, which is updated with a lot of new information that I've been able to acquire through scientific evidence. And the other 4 books, 3 of which I wrote with Stanton Friedman, Captured was one of them. So I want to thank you so much for coming to this presentation. Thank you. If you'd like to stick around, I think there's time to take a few questions.
Yes, for sure. There's microphones.
There is, Tim says. Great. Yes. She asked if Betty had any children after the abduction. No, Betty was 42 years old when she had the abduction. She didn't have children, but she adopted her first husband's children and raised them. So she raised 3 children from the time the youngest one was 3 years old. So she thought of those as her children. And Barney had 2 sons from a previous marriage. Any other questions?
Yeah, Kathleen, thank you for coming. I was wondering what might have happened to the vehicle that they were in, and has anybody done any metallurgy work on it, and where is it at this point in time? Thank you.
So many people have asked me that question, and people who have tried to track that vehicle down. No one has ever found it. What happened to that vehicle is after Betty was ready to sell it, she sold it to her daughter and son-in-law, and he was in the Air Force, and they were transferred to another base. And then they eventually traded it in for another vehicle. No one has ever been able to trace that vehicle, but we do know that there was a magnetic field around the trunk of the car. And I saw those spots, as did other family members. Any other questions?
Hi, yes.
Yes.
Forgive me, I'm a little nervous, so I hope my question
No
is
problem.
succinctly asked to you.
Take a deep breath.
So I'm wondering, I feel like a lot of the information that's come to me over the time I've had an interest in UFOs and aliens has been from cultures that are populated by white individuals. And I know that there are other continents, other peoples experiencing these things, but I don't feel like I have access to that information. Are there other people, you know, on the continent of Africa, Asia, South America, that are amassing this information similarly to what you're doing and the other speakers, and getting that information out there? And I'm so interested in this because if we are supposed to come together and work as a whole planet, we need to be speaking to each other and experiencing what's happening around the world, you know, not just in Germany, not just in the United States, Canada. And do you have any information about that?
Well, in our studies, we attempted to solicit input from people around the world, and in Free's study as well. Free's study was 5,000 people, ours at MUFON was 516. But in terms of South America, I talked to a medical doctor down there, and he has conducted studies with experiencers, and he's very much interested in the contact phenomena. And actually, he has set up a lecture for us by an experiencer down in South America who can call in craft. The craft rises up out of the ocean, moves in. It's been observed by hundreds of individuals, including people from the media, and he can communicate with these non-humans on the craft. So they're doing it a little bit differently than we're doing it here in the United States, but this is entirely credible, in my opinion, after speaking extensively with this medical doctor.
Thank you.
This is going on in Australia too, and New Zealand, other places who are, it's more experiencer oriented rather than social studies oriented. Yes.
I didn't know I was next. My name is Maureen Morgan, and I'm the Washington MUFON State Director, and we have 4 members of our Washington MUFON team who are also on the experiencer research team, and we invite anybody who's an experiencer to come over and talk to our folks who, you know, we would love to hear your stories, so come on over and talk to us. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, hi. Can you talk a little more about the connection between abductions and shadow entities, please?
Well, what the council told us is that these shadow entities are just higher vibrating beings, and that since we have raised our vibration, we're able to see them. I know that it's also associated with negative contact. I know that there's a really scary mode to that. I don't know how extensive that is because I'm aware of the paranormal, but it's not something I really specialize in. So that's what I know. I've seen shadow entities in my home. I've also had them come near me, and I could feel the very strong electrical tingling before I received, kind of in a very relaxed state and feeling ecstatic, whatever that meant, but some messages.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Awesome. You do incredibly important work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
There was an experiencer study done with high credibility back in the 1990s by Dr. John Mack from Harvard.
Yes.
The peer study, Program for Extraordinary Experience Research, where they screened the participants for any signs of mental question, mental non-health illness, whatever.
Yes.
I had it shared with me that the study that was done recently through the Edgar Mitchell program was did not involve any kind of thorough examination of the client's mental health
No,
background.
even though the scientists involved wanted to do more, there was no funding.
Right.
So what we had is retired academics who were doing this work. We had a statistician who has his doctorate and is still working in a very high-level position, but has an interest in this. But yeah, there was no attempt to determine the mental health of those individuals.
Right. Now, can you just reflect on the study you mentioned today? Was that taken to a higher standard?
Let me first talk about the first study, which I didn't talk about. It was 75 people. And we had 50 experiencers, and we had a 25-person control group. And what we wanted to do was to determine whether these experiencers had characteristics that were not common in the general population. And we were able to identify 23 characteristics. Then in the second MUFON, the study, the first one was done just by me and Denise Stoner. The second one was with Dr. Don C. Donderi.
Right.
So what we had was the American Personality Inventory and the answers to the way people answered those questions. That was based on the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which is a psychological measure.
It's a standard, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
but I funded that MUFON study.
Oh,
And Dr. George Medich also funded it. He's now, I was director for 10 years, and he is now director.
excellent. Thank you so much for that answer.
You're welcome.
Hello, Kathleen. Thank you for your wonderful research and presentation. So my question is, we hear so much from many presenters and researchers and experiencers about raising our vibration,
Yes,
different nomenclature, raising our frequency to the effect of improving the conditions of mankind and
yes.
the planets, the Goldilocks planets and all the people everywhere. So have you received any suggestions about how we humans can raise our vibrations, raise our frequency
Yes,
to bring this about?
yes, because I had to go through this in order to raise my frequency, because I was so scientific and left-brained that I was having difficulty at first. And I had to get over into my right brain. And the way that I did that was through guided meditation. So I met with and meditated with a group of researchers who were involved in this study once a week. And it was a matter of bringing divine light to protect ourselves, going through, I enjoy going through a chakra meditation to clear the chakras. I start with divine light, move down through the chakras, go down, spiral down into the center of the earth, bring up the benevolent force from the earth, and so bring it back up, grounding myself when I don't want to be off, meditating somewhere. And that really helped. But it's a matter of protecting yourself with this light, of being relaxed. Eventually, I was able to use my third eye to visualize these entities. That's how I had the information to draw those pictures that you saw. I had drawn them. And so that's how I did it. If you go to my website, Kathleen-Marden.com, it will give you more information. I know a lot of these people who are having negative contact would like to be able to raise their vibration, and so that these lower entities would not attach to them. And so the instructions are there. There are many nice guided meditations to raise your vibration on YouTube. You just have to do a search. So it works.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello. I was curious, is there anything you could elaborate on the people that were abducted, specifically women that had children after being unaccounted for children? Can you go a little more in depth on that?
Yes. Among those who are intergenerational experiencers, there appears to be a program to upgrade the human genome. These children, so many of them are just geniuses, in the top group among children of their age. But not only are they very bright, they have other gifts as well. They might be top athletes at the same time, liked by their teachers, liked by their peers. Just incredible kids. A lot of people call them indigo children. Mary Rodwell from Australia specializes in studying these children. I think that Barbara Lamb did some of this as well. I've met some of these kids, and they are just incredible children.
Hi, Kathleen.
Yes.
Thanks for your presentation. I'm very grateful to be able to have heard not just one set of issues or one information from one book, but this overview you provide today. That was really great.
Thank you.
And a lot of these ideas or a lot of these discoveries have floated to the top of people who've been doing this kind of research. So it's kind of a lot of it's out there already in pieces, and it's good to hear it all congealed. My question is, this mic makes my voice look sound interesting. The last quotes that you gave us from, I didn't quite get who these were translated from, but through. But they were very articulate. The aliens seemed to know which countries were Russia and Europe, and it was very either edited or clearly coming from, they knew about us. They knew us. They've been in touch with our governments. They very clearly saying, we've been making contact with you.
Yes.
So it seems to be clear that they want to help us and they want us to help ourselves, and they are doing some of that. You know, they are helping repair the magnetic field, for example, or they're trying to, undo some of what we've done with nuclear explosions. So my question is basically, there seems to be a line. They're here. I believe they've been here for a long, long time. They want to help us. They want us to help ourselves, but they either can or are willing to only go so far. Like, they could probably clean up the plastic in our oceans or in our bloodstreams, or, there's a lot that they probably could do, and yet they're not. So I'm wondering if there's anything you could say about your perception or understanding of, like, why they want to help, but not fast enough. you know.
That's one of 120 questions that we asked and that are in my new book. But what they say is that they are trying not to have a really large impact on people of Earth. They're different than us. They want us to grow and develop ourselves. They're only here to intervene if we're about to destroy ourselves. But they're here to guide us if we're willing to accept that guidance, but not to show craft all over the world, because that would be viewed as an invasion. They don't want to traumatize humans. They don't want to upset humans. They don't want to start a war with humans.
It seems like mostly, I might be wrong about this, that the people who are concerned about invasions are, as Brian, God, I forgot his name from last night. Bender, thank you. Said last night, it's mostly people who are responsible for protecting things, that they're the ones who are concerned, invasion, they're dangerous, but there doesn't seem to be much evidence that it seems like they could have done damage if they wanted to, and a lot of the people that have had interactions with them are not afraid of that. So wouldn't it seem like if that's what they wanted, they could probably directly communicate that message to the people who are afraid? Like if they're talking to governments, that's military. I don't want to take more time here, but it seems like that could be addressed and a lot more benefit on this earth could happen if that one sort of fear were allayed in some way.
Yeah, they have real concerns about our military, they say, that they've been shot at, that they're viewed as being a threat to our planet. And, you know, that's just the frame of mind that the military comes from. They're here to protect us. And so they have to look at these entities who are coming in as a possible threat, because many of them have not communicated with these entities. I know among the experiencers that I've worked with, many have been in the military, or they've had parents who had high-level positions in the military or worked with on nuclear programs, and their kids have been taken. So there's that kind of interaction going on, but you know, the closest that we ever have is, did Dwight Eisenhower actually communicate with this council of entities that Mrs. Swan was talking about, who gave information from? I don't know for certain if he actually did. I know that other members of the CIA, wanted evidence, and they showed a UFO at the CIA office. But I don't know about Dwight Eisenhower. I wasn't able to find conclusive evidence that this is what happened with him.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Who do you think was involved with the Phoenix Lights? Were those beneficent ETs? And if so, what were they working to accomplish?
Well, obviously, they were flying in very low and over several states and very slowly. So they might have been attempting to determine how public officials would respond to their presence. And then the public officials had a dismissive attitude toward it, made a big joke out of it. And the people who observed the craft believed that it was an extraterrestrial craft, very large, coming over. But I can't say for certain. This is my guess of what the entities on the craft were doing.
So that would be an experiment in contacting us openly.
Mm-hmm.
And if they considered that a success, perhaps we'll have more such episodes?
I don't know, possibly. I know that more and more people are seeing craft. I've heard a lot of those reports, but, and there are CE5 groups all around the world who are attempting conscious contact, and some of them are successful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
I think you're doing a really great job, and this is
Oh, thanks.
definitely your niche. Like, this is, well, I think everybody probably appreciates that you're doing this because you're doing such a wonderful job. It seems like you're doing it with no effort involved, and that, nothing really bothers you about it. You're just constantly still, even after all these years, just very welcome to everybody coming up to you at all times, and it's just nice to see
Oh, thank you.
that nothing's hardened you after all these years, because this topic is, or could be disturbing, of course. But anyway, what I wanted to say was, or ask was, Benny and Barney Hill, after all the time that you'd spent with them and talked with them, I was just wondering, in correlation with that incident and probably almost every single other one that was civilian-based and not based around certain certain places, such as, you know, towers or nuclear plants, those sort of things, landmarks. But just civilians that have contact. So in correlation with what happened with Benny and Barney Hill and everybody else, did you find that there was a similar thing that that had happened? Like, were they, Benny and Barney Hill, they had just gotten married, right?
They'd
So
been married for a year.
Okay.
Over a
So,
year.
so my, one of my questions was, so were they like in a high vibration? Were they extremely happy during the car ride, and they were just
Oh, yes,
extremely
they were having a
jovial?
ball.
And so and in comparison with all the other, you know, contacts with other people, civilians, so were they possibly in this certain high vibration where they were, you know, extremely happy, and then all of a sudden, you know, they got visited? So, you know, was that a big coincidence with all of these, you know, people that got contacted? Is on their vibration, not so much just by chance?
I'm not sure how to answer that
Okay.
question. I know that Betty, when she was being escorted back to the car, Barney was taken back first. Betty was arguing she wanted to keep that book with those alien symbols as proof of that experience, and those nasty little guys who act as the guards on the craft took it away from her, said she couldn't have it. She couldn't remember the experience, and she said, "I'll remember it if it's the last thing I ever do." And so she's being escorted back to the car, and she says to the one she called the leader, that we know now is the escort, that individual takes the human time and time again. They have a relationship. And so Betty said to him, "Well, I could put you in touch with people who have a lot more knowledge about this than I do. Do you think you could come back?" And he said to her, "Maybe we can, but it's not my decision to make." And Betty said, "If you can come back, how will you find me? Out of all the people on this planet, how will you find me?" And he said, "We can always find those we're looking for." So it made me wonder if Betty already had that vibration, if Betty already had been taken from the time she was a kid growing up on that farm in New Hampshire and just didn't have any memory of it. Because
Right.
my mother, we never revealed this, my mother was an experiencer too.
Wow. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
During your study of contactees, have you ever had an experience where a contactee disappeared permanently?
I have not, no.
And my second part is, have any of these contactees been contacted by like the secret military or anything like that?
Some people that I have spoken with who they're having a really hard time with this because generally it was a father who held a high-level position in the military. or around, was involved in the nuclear program, nuclear weapons. And the kids have been taken from the time they were young, and if they try to go for help, they're threatened. They're threatened with their lives. One of the people who participated in the study with the Council of Eight that I was talking about is Dr. Melanie Barton-Bragg. And she had one client, she's a psychotherapist. She had one client who had this kind of experience, this military involvement. And Melanie, this woman was being threatened, but Melanie received a call threatening her life as well, threatened you. End this counseling immediately. And then Melanie was walking through the woods with her grandson. She had a cell phone with her. She received a call on that cell phone, and a voice was there and played back what Melanie had just said to her grandson. So yeah, threats, that kind of threat. But not with everybody, only with a certain segment of the experiencer groups.
Hi.
Yes, hi.
Melanie is my friend, and one of the reasons I'm here is because we are friends. But I wanted to ask you if you could comment a little bit about the Antarctica. I know there have been some high-level officials who've made some very mysterious trips down there recently, and I just wonder if you know anything about any of that.
I only know the rumors. I don't know the inside information, so I really can't comment on that.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I don't know a lot about probably what most of the people here know about, but I keep hearing about a hybrid program. Can you speak to the hybrid program?
Yes, this is a program where the non-human entities, mostly the grays, but the insectoids are involved in it too, the mantis types, are creating hybrids. Now, different researchers have different attitudes toward this. I know that they're upgrading children of experiencers that I've worked with. I would never reveal who they are because I think their life could be in danger. There are others who, you go on Craft and you see these like very large vials with fetuses in various stages of development in kind of a viscous fluid. And some of them look like grays initially. Sometimes they then look like grays and a combination. Sometimes they look very human. And experiencers have observed those on the Craft. They've held these hybrid babies. I've been more involved in knowing about the children who are born to experiencers, the mother, the father, and raised on this planet. Because with my background in sociology, I believe that a child who was raised in an alien environment and then put on Earth as an adult can never be fully human, regardless of how intelligent they are. Maybe I'm wrong, but that is the opinion that I have formed about that, the hybrids here to supplant humans. I have a different point of view than that. I think that they're trying to upgrade our DNA to move us ahead on an evolutionary scale because we still have these primitive emotions and behaviors.
Yeah. Have you done investigations on any of the humans that say that they're part of the hybrid program, like they're mothers of?
Yes, I have worked with some of these kids even can do telekinesis, where they can move things just by staring at them and using their mind. They can turn on a microwave oven without touching it, that sort of thing. And I've seen video of that. So I've known a few, but that hasn't been my primary focus.
Right. Is any of this in one of your books that I should get?
The only one that I can think of is my new book with questions that we asked the Council of Eight.
Just got that one. Okay,
Yes.
good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I have two questions. One is on that healing on the orb. How is it that they got that on camera, that the camera was just happening to be focused on the closet? And my second question was, is there any correlation you think with, 411 Missing Books by David Pilates? People go missing, like 500 to 600,000 people just go missing each year. And in some of his research, you could be hiking with friends, and the last person in the line, they turn to talk to them, and they're just gone. I mean, there's no yelling, there's no cry for help, there's no animal attack, there's nothing, they're just gone, they never find them. I'm just wondering if you've seen any, or researched any correlation between contacts, UFOs, and maybe the part of the missing.
Yeah, I have not worked with anyone who has gone missing like that, but my speculation would be that there are interdimensional portals that open up and they just get stuck in a portal taken to another time. That's just speculation. I don't know what's going on there.
And then the camera. And then the camera question.
The camera question?
On the orb. I mean, how they
Oh,
caught
about,
that.
yeah, about Jim. Well, I worked with Jim over many years, and Jim was trying to get evidence. So I had trained him on things to do, and he developed the ability to sense when they were around and to focus his camera on them. So he was holding his cell phone with the camera when he sensed that something was going to happen. A lot of experiencers sense that something is going to happen before it does. He was one of those. And so he was able to focus that camera on that wall and then capture that orb flying across the room. And he did not fake that. Two more questions.
Hi there. I am a big science guy. I think a lot of physicists believe that space is a fabric. And like a blanket, if you pull the middle, two ends will come together. You briefly said something about the 9th dimension.
Yes.
Is there any way you could kind of tell me a little bit more about that?
The 9th dimension? Well, the 9th dimension will say that they at one time did have bodies. This 9th dimensional said that he actually had a body and lived in Europe and in Egypt very, very long time ago. And that he has elevated through the frequencies to the 9th dimension where he no longer has a body. But he says that he is here sort of to oversee the Galactic Council, who is here to protect this quadrant of our galaxy. That's what they say. I have no verification that that's true. I'm only reporting what they've said. Is there one last question?
Ms. Marden, thank you for coming, and please come again.
Oh, I hope to.
When I was a kid, I got a bunch of UFO comic books. This was back in the early 60s, and it described a wide variety of entities that were seen, everything from small little guys to big robots. Over time, is it my observation that we've now down to just a few singular entities? Have you ever speculated on how that change occurred?
I have. I mean, a lot of times science fiction has mimicked science before science has been discovered. Now, I don't know how these cartoonists or science fiction movie writers acquired their information. But I know in the case of Betty and Barney Hill, they had no interest in UFOs or in non-human entities until they had their experience. Yet, they were under hypnosis able to remember the characteristics, physical characteristics of those entities, of two different sizes of grays, larger heads than bodies. The taller ones were smaller heads in proportion to the body than the little guard types. Telepathic communication, no hair on their bodies. One of the skeptics has written that before Barney's hypnosis, he had watched Outer Limits, and it was a program about the Bifrost Man. And I actually have a presentation where I show the original film of the Bifrost Man, made from paper mache, the way it was originally. Also the new mask that is being shown, that is more like what Barney and Betty described, trying to debunk all of this. But there were many, many differences that I found. And on top of that, Carl Flock, who worked for the CIA and was also interested in UFOs and did an extensive investigation of the Hill case and believed that it was real, said that he found no evidence that Betty or Barney had ever watched Outer Limits, had ever watched that show. In fact, Barney was out working at night. He was working for the post office in the evening and would not have been home when that show was even shown. So then some skeptics will say, well, he must have heard about it from somewhere. Well, Barney had conscious recall of observing those entities looking down at him. It's in the original reports. They're dressed in black, shiny uniforms. That's not what the Bifrost Man was dressed in. The facial characteristics were different. The only thing that was similar was that there was kind of a large slanted eye with a small eye inside. Now, that's not what Betty and Barney saw. It was a large eye that was slanted, and there was some yellow around a very large, dark iris. They described these entities as having a very weak chin, almost no space between the mouth and the bottom of the chin. The Bifrost Man has a very large, prominent chin. The Bifrost Man has like a ridge along here and a ridge across here. That's not what Betty and Barney described. So, some skeptics have been attempting to dismiss the entire event based on that. They can't do it. It doesn't hold up under scrutiny.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And that's it. Thank you so much for coming to my lecture. I'll be here tonight for the panel discussion.